How the mirror in their eyes shows you God. A lot of people, you especially, you keep on constantly blaming yourself for ruining the relationships with your significant others, or you keep on blaming your significant others for ruining the relationships, right? And little do you know, it's actually not you, right? A lot of these problems are not because of what you've done. Perhaps yes, it's because of what you've done, right? The action it takes, right? It's what you do. It's what you did. Yes, it is what you did. Yes, it is what they did, and you are wrong. It's actually not what they did. It's actually who they are, and the effect of it is actually what they did in their relationships. Because you think that those little arguments or those little conflicts are the problem, are the core conflict, the core cause that makes your relationship go the other way around, go go the way that you don't expect it to go to. As you can see here, the mirror, right? Take a look at this drawing. The mirror, you. This is basically you. This is you. Oh, my pen is running out. This is you. You are looking into God from the mirror of their eyes. So what I'm going to be talking about here is actually you looking at yourself, which is you as God, right? But you're looking at it from another person's perspective. You're looking at it from another person's view, perspective, right? What do I mean by this? Let's start. So what does God do? God uses unveiled relationships to reveal the distortions in your perceptions. Can you see this? My marker is about to die. Oh my god. Does this one work? Perceptions through, there you go. Love and shadow. So what do I mean by this, right? God uses unveiled relationships to reveal the distortions in your perception through love and shadow. Now, what does unveiled means? From the word unveil, veil is, or how do you pronounce it? Veil. Veil is something you use to cover it up. You veil it. You have this, like, you cover it. For a lot of Muslim women, it's called the veil, right? You used to cover their hair, so you're not going to show it. There's like a rule in Islam, right? And unveiled meaning deep, like this deep love, deep relationship towards each other. That's the unveiled relationships. And God uses this to reveal the distortions in your perceptions through love and shadow. What does this mean, right? So the distortions in your perceptions, right? Basically, you have this sort of, from the word distortion itself, right? Distortion is this thing that is very, how do we say it? Very messy, right? Distortion is something that is abnormal, something that is not original, something that has been altered from your perception, something from the word dis itself, right? Distortions, distorted. You are not in the original state. You're altered from the state, right? And what does this mean? We can connect this distortion to what we call the self. Because from the word dis itself, right? Distortions, that means we are out of our original state. Now the self is our original state. Now this original state is being distorted, is being changed, right? Through love and shadow. And what's the importance of this? Let's say if you look at your partner as this enemy, right? Because she keeps on creating conflict. She keeps on triggering you. She keeps on overreacting to small things, and you hate it. You don't like it, right? She keeps on trying to be nice, and then she gets angry, and then there's a lot of this ups and downs that you hate. Or perhaps she does this bad habit that you dislike, and because of that you look at her as this creature, this like distorted human being, right? You're like, why does she keep on doing this? Why does she keep on doing this to me? Is it me or is it her? But from this perspective, I know it's her. Why does she keep on doing this bad habit? Why does she keep on lashing out at me, getting angry at me? I don't like it. I dislike it. Why? What's the reason of all of this, right? That's the distortion in your perception. Now, little do you know, that perception is actually wrong. Sorry, it's not wrong, it's not to blame for, but it is there. And it is what's driving you all these conflicts and arguments with her. Because you cannot take her as this human being, or you're not able to open your heart or open your soul to receive the bad things, quote unquote, the bad things from her, right? Now, what I mean by that, because as I said before, you look at her in a way that in your deep relationships, in your unveiled relationships, you look at her through both love and shadow, right? If it's love, well, perhaps it's not sort of distorted, right? Because you see compassion, you see affection, you see appreciation, right? Now, God uses this relationship to show who you are, because how she treats you is coming from yourself, right? Think about that for a sec. How she behaves and how she acts, especially when you want to become the man, you want to lead in relationships, how she handles herself, how she how she embraces this emotional space between you and her, it all reflects back to yourself. That's what I mean by mirroring. Now, what I mean by like God is because God first, right? God is equivalent. So we're not saying God as God, like literal God, right? Because we cannot see God. But what we can see and feel is actually the truth, wholeness, purity, greatness, right? This is what we see. If we think of God, what do we think about? We think of truth, we think of wholeness, we think of purity, we think of greatness, right? And if God uses unveiled relationships to reveal the distortion in your perception, then what I'm saying here, what's my point here is, however you see your partner, if you see your partner as a distorted human being, right, it reflects to yourself. There's something distorted about yourself. Isn't that crazy? So whatever conflict, whatever you whatever arousal, whatever this anger that you have towards your significant other is the result of this distortion in your own soul. Because perhaps first you are unconscious of it, but when you watch this video, now you know that God is using this unveiled relationships, the past relationships, or the recent one, or the one you're in right now, who knows, that you're in, to reveal that altered state within your brain, within your mind, within your soul, to show you that there is something to fix. There is something wrong. There's no something wrong, but there is to some degree, there is this state that you have to go back to its original one, right? You have to go back to your original state. This is what God is trying to show you. These are warning signs. A lot of the crisis that happens, a lot of breakups, a lot of relationship attachment issues are given by God to show that there is something in you that you have to fix. That's why this distortion in your perception, meaning that there's an altered state inside of you that you have to fix, because God wants to show the truth. And the truth is, there is something altered within your original state, and you're unconscious of it, right? Because God wants to show wholeness, purity, and greatness. And even though you're in the state that is altered, God will still show you that, because God is all about truth, right? And then, well, in the other side, love itself, God will show it, because perhaps there's another part of yourself that it isn't really altered, that isn't really distorted. That's why God shows you through love, through passion, through affection, through appreciation. The truth is that, if we put it into a statement, the truth is that through whatever your partner does, or both of you do, right, there is that compassion, affection, and appreciation. But on the other hand, the shadow part, perhaps there is full of hatred. Perhaps there is that anger. Perhaps there is that the shadow, right? The shadow is basically the unconscious material deep inside your heart that you you banish it from your consciousness state. And when you have those unconscious material, even though it's stored deep inside your heart, the parts of you that you don't want to show, that you don't want to bring out because it can cause pain, it will do anyway, because it will be projected to your partner. It's called projected shadow, right? It will be projected to your partner. That's why when your partner does something and you, let's say you overreact, or let's say you start being so furious at that thing, there is some anger part within you that you have to get to know, and you have to approach, and you have to fix it, right? And that's the shadow that we're talking about here, because that's unconsciously driving and operating your relationships in a way that it doesn't want to cause any pain. But that behavior of not wanting to cause any pain is still being projected anyway, and you have to fix around that. You get what I'm saying here? I hope you're getting this, because this is a very complex topic. But perhaps what I want to get you through here is, you just know that whatever your partner does, and perhaps you dislike it, or perhaps you overreact to it, maybe you're conscious, or maybe you're unconscious of it. Maybe you're aware that you keep on overreacting to things, little things that your partner says. Maybe yes, maybe no. But if you do, then you have to understand that that's not the real you, because you are altered from this original state, right? This is original state before, but now you're this, like, this is you. This is how you see everything. This is how you see your relationship, especially because unveiled relationships, meaning you want to expose every little thing about yourself to the other person, to the significant others, both the love and also the shadow. And the shadow isn't necessarily bad, but it's something that you have to understand and you have to be aware of, or not. That shadow will be the main drive of your relationship crisis, and the love will be overwhelmed by the shadow itself because you show more shadow than you do with love. I'm gonna write it down first and I'm gonna explain. Alright. Alright. Let's explain this. The conflict that keeps showing up, right? Being seen, right? It's being filtered by the glasses of your story, not the present. As we can see here, there's eyes of brokenness, not God. So what do I mean by this, right? I'll think about your recent conflict, whether if it's an argument about going to places on like where to eat, or an argument about doing the laundry, an argument about work, an argument about some relations to attachment, an argument about anything. Think about your most recent arguments, not only with your significant other, but also with other people, perhaps your friends, perhaps your colleagues, perhaps your family members, right? Anyone, your siblings, right? It can be anything. Just think about all of the arguments that you had and think about the most recent ones, right? Now, those little arguments on how the result, or how it's not initiated, right? Perhaps, okay, well, in other word, how that conflict actually is created first is because someone initiated it, right? And it turns into a conflict. Not quite, but it's somewhere there. But what we're talking about here is the response, right? What I'm talking about here is the response that you give, the provision from that conflict, from that argument, right? Now, what I'm saying here, what's my point here? No, the conflict that keeps showing up is filtered by these glasses, right? What is this glasses? Because every time you have conflict and every time you have argument, perhaps you keep on, most of the time, you keep on being angry with the person, or you keep on trying to be submissive. You keep on trying to just say yes to whatever the person says. And when the person actually does not change, when you say yes, you start to sort of guilt trip the person or manipulate the person in a way. Perhaps you're unconscious of this now, but you have to be conscious of it, because this is what's driving this relationship crisis, the life crisis that you didn't want to have, but you had anyway. Right? Perhaps after breakups, you thought to yourself, "Oh, why did I do that? Right? Why do I keep on being angry at her? Why do I keep on lashing out at her? Why do I keep on overreacting to small things that aren't supposed to be, that big of a deal, but you do it anyway? Why did I do that? Why did she do that to me?" Right? You need to keep on asking these questions, and you do actually, because You're trying to see how are you gonna fix it for the next relationship, of course, right? No, I'm not talking about you have to get to a next relationship, because this work of what we're doing here isn't necessarily need. You don't necessarily need to be in a relationship, but you need to be in a state where you're calm and you're centered. So then in the next relationship, you can open your heart more in order for you to uh, lead and become a safe and secure human being. Okay. So what do I mean by this? Again, the glasses, every time you have conflict, this glasses is basically what you use, what you wear. This is like your eye, right? Your eye, what you see. When you have glasses, what does that mean? When you use glasses, that means there's some sort of minus or like magnification, right? Some sort of filter that you have to look, because this is not real life, right? Not all mirror or not all glasses are showing what's like 100% real of like your vision, right? Some of them are actually filtered, or some of them are optimized for a certain look, right? If you're using a glasses that has like a red filter for like blue light glasses, right? I haven't like, where's my blue light glasses? Right here, right? If you wear this, right? If you wear this, when you use these glasses, you are seeing red, right? You're seeing red. You're just seeing red and you're just seeing nothing else. And relate that back to your own self. Relate that back to how you see things, right? Because this is all related to how you see things. And what do I mean by those things? Those things are events, incidents, incidents. I cannot spell incidents. Events, incidents. Let's say conflicts. People in general, right? I'm gonna take these glasses off because you only use blue light glasses at night. I always use it at night, not in the morning, right? So, how you see things, basically, I hope it's still recording, right? Okay. So, how you see things is basically how you see events, incidents, and conflicts, and people are being filtered, being filtered by the glasses. When you look at a conflict and you see that this is sort of okay, I'm gonna just tell you straight away what are the examples of this, right? Let's say you see some people, some conflict as this with a filter, with glasses, right? First, you are unconscious of it, and now you're conscious of it, so you're welcome. So, what do I mean by this? So let's say through the filter, so this is filtered, right? Filtered, you see this conflict as broke. You see your relationship as broken, or you see her as toxic, or you see a person as your enemy, or you see a human being as like the person is sad, the person is lonely, the person is a narcissist, It can be anything, right? And that is the product of the built up of this filter from that glasses. And the reason, the problem with a lot of people these days, they see each other as an enemy. They see each other's significant being as the problem, right? They see they don't have that what's the word? What's the term, yeah? Like they cannot see the human being as just human, right? They cannot see them as something pure, as the truth, as something that is great. They always see them whenever they get into conflict or anything, right? Perhaps they have that denial in their brain that, oh, she's just like that, she's just like this. But your brain also wants to think about that person is toxic, that person is an enemy, a narcissist, whatever, right? And we go out of that relationship thinking the same thing, right? And that's the problem these days. Why do we need to think that the person is toxic, is an enemy, and the person is broken? Why do we have to think certain conflict is just the real cause of just everything, right? Why do we have to overwhelm ourselves with thinking that that small little thing is the reason why the relationship didn't work well, right? Why do we need to think, why do we have to be filtered by these glasses that we put in us, that we equip? And the result from that is, well, we think that one conflict that we had about hanging out with friends are just like this like huge big problem that we have to fix, right? Oh well, on the other hand, like, of course we have to think about it, we have to resolve it, but it can get to a point where that whole problem is just taking up that space within your mind, and you cannot let it just out freely, right? And then how does it affect your day-to-day life, or how does it affect your life with the significant other, is that you will always filter whatever problem that is, or you will have this filter of these towards the problem. And every time your significant other does the like little thing, does this, like, put out this behavior or whatever that is, then your nervous system or your body will come online to think, oh, that's a problem, I have to get away from that. I have to, because I'm seeing from that filter, I'm seeing from the glasses that that's something bad. Don't do that. I'm not gonna do that. Don't do that. Oh my god, this is huge. Oh, we have to argue, blah 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 blah. And then the whole relationship just, it just ends like that, right? And a lot of these problems are driven by your unconscious state, because it's not driven by your conscious state. Remember, your conscious state or yourself is being altered, right? And because it's being altered, the glasses that you wear is given from that filtered glasses, not from your present self. That's why I say here, not from the present. And how does the not presentness, or this association is actually in related with the glasses, right? Because as we can see from the story itself, right? There's here story, right? When we talk about the story, it's basically your old story, right? What is this old story? The old story that you have is basically the story that you're affected by, like in during your past self. right? Your story is what driving, your story is the main cause of that built of the glasses itself, right? Your story is the reason why you are not present. And what is the story? This story is basically the story in your past, the story of how everything affected who you are, the story of how you handle things, the story of how your behavior changes when things go the other way around, right? And what does that look like? What is the story? This is the story of the wounded inner child. What do I mean by this, right? The wounded inner child, the story of the wounded inner child. So what I mean by the story of the wounded inner child is that, imagine this, right? You see a adult, like let's say this is you. This is the illustration that I always give to people. Let's say this is you, right? This is the story of the wounded inner child. This is you as an adult. You are happy, you are, you try to just go on with your life, just normal, right? But then, little do you know, this is your adult self is your conscious state, right? But little do you know, what's building up that filtered glasses is the story of your wounded inner child. So that I don't want to make you look fat, but that wounded inner child there, the boy inside you is still driving your conscious state. But okay, so this is basically your conscious state, right? And this is your unconscious state or your subconscious state. This is the build-up of that glasses. Why? Because the glasses is still why? Because how you're seeing things, right? Let's put on the glasses on you, right? Let's say this is you. Let's put some glasses. Let's put some glasses on you, right? These glasses are still, you see, because this is blue, are still being operated. The filter itself, right? This filter is being operated by this wounded inner boy. And what do I mean by this wounded inner boy? The wounded inner boy is the subconscious mind that still carries burden parts, still carries wounds, traumas, and just many more of the negative stuff, right? When you think of this wounded inner boy that is building up that filtered glasses, what do you think of? You think of those burden parts, those wounds, those traumas, because woundedness, right? The inner child within you, right? It's still this immature little boy. And what I mean by this, so when you think about this wounded inner child, you think of this immature boy, the boy that was 13 years old, the boy that was 7 years old, that was 5 years old, that was 3 years old, right? And he is still stuck within you, unintegrated. Unintegrated. So how you filter out these conflicts, these arguments, is still being driven by the view or by the vision of this wounded inner boy. Why? Because back then, when you were 13, when you were 7, when you were 5, or even when you were 2, you had this traumatic event perhaps you're humiliated, perhaps you are traumatized by your caregivers, right? Whatever that is, this is the wounded inner child. The wounded inner child carrying these burdened parts of you, carrying the burdened parts that you didn't want, but you had to, because as a child, you don't have the emotional capacity to respond to that trauma or that traumatic experience. And what's going to happen is that that little boy will keep that energy, and that energy as a result will be stuck. That energy will be frozen, right? And what's going to happen when it's stuck and frozen, right? Just think logically, right? What do you think is going to happen when that little inner boy is not able to respond to whatever traumatic experience that you had back then, and that because of that, as a result, that energy of that little inner boy, perhaps your inner child or inner little boy, is shocked, or you couldn't cry because of that traumatic experience in order to protect yourself from feeling the pain. That energy or that protection is still stuck in the system of your wounded inner child. And in today's world, if your wounded inner child is unintegrated from yourself, then whatever conflict or whatever problem that you see in your vision, in your eyes, it will still be filtered by the wounded inner boy, right? Your wounded inner boy will still think that, oh, perhaps your father abandoned you or your mother abandoned you, right? And that inner little boy will see all these events, all these incidents, all these arguments and conflict as that fear of abandonment, because that in energy is still stuck in that traumatic scene, is still frozen in that scene or in that moment where that wounded inner boy couldn't understand or couldn't comprehend and couldn't respond to it in a very mature way, right? Because at that moment, your wounded inner boy, the self state, right, as we call it again, the self state or the original state, it's not there to protect him. So what he will do, he will take over, right? And the parts of him, that's why we call burdened parts. The parts of him will be burdened because it will carry those emotional energy, that unresolved energy, which is stuck and frozen from that trauma or from that wound, and it's unintegrated to our adult self. Do you understand where I'm going here, right? So that's why you're still operating in the subconscious state where burdened parts are still present, right? And because your burdened parts are still present, you're not present of your parts of yourself, parts of your original state. And what will happen if you're still carrying those burdened parts and you're seeing this vision of this immature little this child, then every conflict that you have or argument that you have with your significant other will also be immature, will also be like you see it as this burden in yourself as well. So now that you know that you don't want to look at a person, or you don't want to become, or perhaps now you want to integrate your wounded inner child, because you don't want to look at a person with, you don't want to have this immature behavior towards a person, right? You don't want to overreact to small things. You don't want to see the other significant other as this threat, right? This potential threat that can lead to abandonment, that can lead to things like that, right? And how do we do it? So I talked before, right? The thing that you have to do is to integrate, because the difference between integrate and unintegrated is a lot. When you are integrated, you are basically, my camera is not, yeah. When you are integrated, you are able to differentiate your parts. This unintegrated is blended parts, right? And what do I mean by that? Right, the parts, what I call burden parts before, the burden parts, if you're integrated with the wounded inner boy, that means you can differentiate the burden parts and the self parts, right? The difference between the burden parts and the self parts is just, it's very straightforward. The burden parts are the parts that are carrying burden. Self part are the parts that are not carrying burden, right? Now, these burden parts are supposed to be released, right? That's how we're going to not see this filter. This is how we're going to break the filter of another human being, right? These parts are supposed to be, right? The wounded inner child doesn't want to have these burden parts, but because back then the self or your adult self couldn't be there because you're still a child, right? You're still operating in that consciousness of a child. Yourself, your original state, couldn't be there to protect your child from the pain of that traumatic experience or traumatic events. And what's that going to do is that your wounded inner child will take over and will protect yourself from feeling that pain. And how they take over is this immature action that your wounded inner child is going to do, right? And that parts that are taking over is what we call our protective parts, right? Perhaps your father or mother didn't want to let you cry. So what the protective parts will do is to exile those, is to banish those emotions, right? Perhaps you couldn't respond, so you just shut down your whole body. You just keep your mouth shut. And what you're gonna do is that person will still see events that are in today's present moment. If anything, if there's any signs or any warnings that is leading to those burden parts or leading to those traumatic experience, the parts will make you shut down. And the parts will perhaps express anger, even though you don't want to, but the parts will still do, because it was taking over back then, right? It didn't trust you well enough for yourself to take over. So when you experience those some kind of traumatic experience, then your protective parts will do its best to protect you from feeling that pain again. And what it is gonna, and however the parts are gonna protect you are like, these are like some examples of it, right? But whatever protection that your protective parts do, they are not bad, right? That's why we want to see the truth. We don't want to see the other person through this filter of your old story. We don't want to see the other person as this enemy, as this bad person or whatever, because it's actually ourself that is quote unquote bad, that can quote unquote lead to a bad way. But then again, these quote unquote bad parts are actually our protective parts. It's just there to protect us from feeling the pain. So let's say if you're, I don't know, if your partner does something very, very bad, and you actually you became this furious person towards her, right? Your furiousness, or is that called furiousness, is actually your protective parts, because you don't want to feel that pain of another being or another person doing something quote unquote wrong, because maybe she does something wrong, maybe big, maybe small, but perhaps back then your father, if you do something wrong, that your father will straight away yell at you in this very uneasy way, in a very unsettling way, right? And what you do is I will actually become your caregiver, and you will lash out and have this anger towards your partner as well, because you're unconscious of it. Again, that's the unconscious material, right? Those are the protective parts of is built up from your own story, from that traumatic experience. Now, in order for us to actually integrate these parts and actually differentiate it, is I think my battery died. But in order for us to be integrated, we have to do some releasing, right? And in order for us to release that, right, we have to do some sort of releasing and reparenting. Because when we do some sort of releasing, right, what is this all about? We have to release the burden parts. We have to release the burden parts, and we have to reparent them. We have to show them what they're capable of doing, right? We have to give them a new role to do, a new role, a new we have to reparent, and we have to teach new roles towards the parts, towards the unburdened parts when they are unburdened, right? And after we release that burden parts, then we have to reparent. And one of the ways to do this is you have to release emotions from those. Release emotions that were first unresolved or stuck, right? And perhaps you're reparenting, you can fulfill their original desires, because a lot of these parts have desires, they have wants, they have needs, right? And you do that when you are in your reparenting part. But before you can fulfill their original desires, you have to release their emotions that are unresolved, that are stuck in this system, right? And in order for you to do that is what we call original pain work. Original pain work. What this original pain work actually is actually the work that you have to do in order for you to release emotions that are unresolved. And then after that, you want to repair it. I think original pain work is more to release emotions that are unresolved, and then you want to fulfill the original desires. Now, one of the meditations that we can do, because this is all relating, this is nothing new, but this is just me telling you on how to do it. This is what I want you to get started with, right? It's called the ifs meditation. The ifs meditation are basically this internal family part, internal families, right? From ifs, this is internal family, right? Your internal family are basically the burden parts and the unburdened parts. Right? The burden parts and the unburdened parts, and you have to differentiate between both, right? You have to release the burden parts, and you have to show up with the unburdened parts, right? And as this like meditation, okay, I'm just gonna show you on how to do it. Yeah. So you want to get comfortable. So the things you can do, maybe like 20 minutes a day, right? Maybe 20 minutes, or maybe more. So first you want to get comfortable, and then you want to feel and breathe. Then you want to see if there are parts within your body that are calling you. This can be as like maybe your shoulders, there's some tension in your shoulders, maybe your abdominal part, maybe your brain, maybe your jaw, maybe your traps, maybe your feet, anything, right? Anything that is like that has this like tension, right? Whatever that tension is, those are the burden parts that are calling you to like they want to say something to you, right? This is not some like spiritual thing. This is not the devil. This is like yourself, right? And you have to sort of talk. You have to have this inner dialogue with those parts in your body, and you want to see if they want to show something to you, or you want to see if you can talk to them in a way, right? If they want to see, if they want to say, oh, there's something that is unsettling here. Like I wanna fix this, right? You have to see your thoughts, emotions, behavior around those tensed up or around those numb parts of your body. And from there, they can tell you what you really need. You just want to try it out for 20 minutes first, and then, you know, you can see if it works or not. A lot of people actually, it doesn't work yet because your body doesn't allow itself to trust to your original state or your original self. And what you want to do there is to actually repeat this. Perhaps you want to repeat every 2 or 3 days because it doesn't trust you yet on what you want to know. Now, these are the burden parts, and you have to find out what they're saying. From my experience, I have this tension up in my shoulders, and it's this like quiet little person that just annoys me all the time. I feel annoyed by my shoulders, right? Because it's always tense. It keeps on getting in my way every time I want to do something, right? And also my traps also, it doesn't feel right. And I tried this as well. And from there, they said something to me. They said that they want to be fixed, they want to be released. Like they don't want to actually be there, but they just have to, because for multiple reasons. And the thing that I want to get you out of this is I actually just want you to feel those burden parts first. And then perhaps in another video we can get onto more of the deep work, right? I can explain to you more on how to actually do it. But the thing that I want you to get out of this is just I want you to feel those burden parts first. Because after you feel those burden parts, you're gonna have this more understanding of what's actually calling you, what's actually burdening you, and you can actually release those emotions afterwards. So if you enjoy this, I think my camera died, so I'm sorry if it did. If you enjoy this, then please subscribe, and yeah, stay tuned for another video. Bye.